Here we are back again. What's the name of this thing? In Between Rounds. The MMA podcast featuring Nate Quarry.
What up?
Tim Carpenter. There he is. He gets his chair to squeak. He gets the spotlight. So, we might be a week late on this, but we're going to talk about it nonetheless. That's how relevant we are. We get this stuff a week late. Jon Jones caught using drugs, cocaine.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I don't believe in nothing anymore. Come on.
Newsflash. Jon Jones using coke. I think they boiled the timeline back to when he was in Brazil. And it was, what did they call it? Off, whatever, I don't know what they call that drug test that they did, like if it's off. It's not the fight drug test. It's one that the athletic commission does.
Out of camp.
Out of competition.
Out of competition, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Out of competition drug test. The UFC was aware of the positive drug tests, is my understanding. Nate will complain about that soon. We'll let him get to that in a second. And he'll be shooting arrows at the tank of the UFC. And they did allow him to fight. And we'll talk a little bit about other fighters that have been kind of popped using different drugs and have not been treated the same as Jon Jones. So, Nate Quarry, where do you see this thing? Like, what are your thoughts on the way it was handled? Jon Jones getting caught using coke. Jon Jones, as we just talked about a little bit off air, going to rehab and staying a whole 24 hours, and that kind of thing.
Well, this plays right into the need for a sanctioning body for the whole sport of MMA, because UFC is the promoter. They put together the fights, they pay everyone, all this, so they set the rules. And anytime there's an actual problem or something that needs to be dealt with, then the UFC looks at the situation and says, what is in our best interest? How can we handle this the best way? If Jon Jones was some scrub up-and-comer who got busted for cocaine 4 weeks before his fight, I guarantee you the fight would have been scrapped. It would have been come out, UFC, tough on drugs. We take a hard line on this stuff. He's out of here. He needs to go to rehab, come back in a year.
Like they did with Matt Riddle.
Yeah, when it's Jon Jones and it's somebody who's going to put together a big pay-per-view for them, they just wash it under the rug. And this whole talk about, well, it was out of competition drug testing, so it really doesn't, there's nothing we can do about it. Really? Who do you think is buying that shit? You're telling me that you're drug testing athletes 4 weeks before a fight for fun? There's no consequences there whatsoever. You drug test an athlete, he tests positive for cocaine. Hey, nothing we can do about it. It's out of competition. So why the hell is Anderson Silva banned for life? Because you went to drug test him and he took off. Well, what does it matter if you would have caught him with horse tranquilizer in his blood? Hey, it's out of competition. It's no big deal.
How dare you say that about Vanderlei?
Well, I think the issue is that cocaine is not banned, is not on the banned substance list. Where Matt Riddle got thrown out because he tested positive for marijuana, which is on the banned substance list. Which I don't understand.
Wait. The cocaine is not on. So I could be blowing lines of cocaine, and if it shows up in my system, it's not illegal.
No, that's ridiculous.
Hey, I'm just talking about what I read on the internet.
Well, then it must be true.
I had heard that cocaine. That's what one of the athletic commission guys or somebody had said from the UFC said coke isn't on the banned substance list. That's why they couldn't do anything about it. Whereas weed is.
I don't believe that for a second. But if that is the case, the UFC has their own standards, and the fighters must follow these types of rules. At any point, for any reason, the UFC can say, we're suspending you for a year, no trial whatsoever. We feel that you're not doing things appropriately as far as our brand and for your own safety. UFC can make up whatever rules they want to. This is just blatantly, this is how they're going to make money, so they just sweep it under the rug.
So it's the athletic commission that administers the test, not the UFC. so that people are kind of clear on that. But it's the UFC that sets its code of ethics, that sets the standard that the contract and the athlete needs to abide by. So we have two separate entities that kind of work together.
I don't think anybody really knows, because the UFC does its own testing, Athletic Commission does testing. A lot, like, there's different people are doing different tests, and that's like I agree with what Quarry said. They need to have a sanctioning body that handles all this stuff, because like it doesn't make sense for the UFC to be handling testing, because they would lose a ton of money if Jon Jones couldn't fight in that fight. So even if he tested positive for every steroid in the world plus cocaine, if they could hide that for a little while to get the fight so people would buy the pay-per-views, they would definitely do it.
Well, there's a bylaw with the Nevada State Athletic Commission that says in the event that a main event fighter, a side law, an also law, a rule.
Tim is confused by but you know, whatever.
The law can go either way. It says that if there's a main event fighter that tests positive for a drug before the fight, they can.
I got guys.
Well, professional here, round by round.
As professionally as Nate would like to create, it's In Between Rounds, Nate Quarry, the name of the podcast that you helped create. Go ahead.
I came up with the name too. That's awesome.
So you were talking about the bylaws of the Nevada State Athletic Commission?
Because this is obviously, it's happened before. If a fighter tests positive for a banned substance before the fight, the promoter has the option to continue putting on the fight, and then they can penalize the fighter later. Because there's millions and millions of dollars that go into the local economy, so they're going to do everything that they can to make sure that the fights go on, while at the same time putting on this air of, we want everything to be clean, we want everybody following the rules, when it just comes down to money. It's just that simple.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting, just because, you know, like the UFC has to serve a couple masters, right? So they come, like you're saying, they're coming down hard on a guy that's a scrub, but when the guy, you know, how much do you think the brand of Jon Jones generated for the UFC? You know what I'm saying? You can't say that every single penny that UFC pay-per-view made is because of him, but you know what I'm saying, like he's worth millions and millions upon millions of dollars to that organization. So yeah, I mean, if they could sweep it under the rug, they can, but how do they sweep this under the rug and get away with it?
Well, I think the hardcore fans are the ones that are up in arms about this and are bothered, but that's like 5% of the people that are buying the pay-per-view. Most of the guys are just your casual fan. They'll watch this, they'll like it, but they really don't follow it that much in depth. So I think that the UFC can just sweep things away, or come out with, like Dana White came out with his video saying, oh, you know, we love Jon Jones, we know he's got a problem, we're going to support him. And for your average fan, they'll look at that and go, wow, Dana White really does care about these fighters. But then when you take that video and then you cut it in with him talking about a Matt Riddle or somebody else and their drug use, then you see when it's somebody expendable, we're hard on drugs, we take a hard line.
Right.
But when it's somebody who's a generator of money for them, you know, we're the most understanding company around, we're going to help these guys out. It's been shown over and over again. Forrest Griffin, Rashad Evans make racy or controversial comments on Twitter or on Facebook. It's okay. Nothing is said. Somebody else, I forget the guy's name, made a joke about a rape fan, and he was actually quoting a TV show when he tweeted it. He was immediately cut by the UFC. We don't tolerate that stuff. Oh, you don't tolerate it when it's somebody you can use as an example. When it's somebody who makes you money, you'll put up with a lot.
Right, and I'm assuming they'll use that to promote that they're hard line on blah blah blah, this that and the other. So at the end of the day, you're proposing that there'd be a worldwide or countrywide governing body for MMA?
Well, just like every other sport, there should be a sanctioning body that the athletes and the promoters answer to. If you go to like the NFL Players Association, the guy who just knocked out his wife in the elevator.
Ray Rice.
Ray Rice. The NFL blatantly said, okay, your career is done, you're over with. Well, the Players Association jumped right in and said, hey, you've got to give this guy a trial. We've got to step up. We've got to show his side of the story. We need to protest this. So even in a case where it's blatantly on video, a man beating the crap out of his fiancée, then wife, even then the player still has a route that they can take where it's not just a lifetime ban type of thing. I realize that's a kind of an effed up example to use, but when you compare that to the UFC, where Kung Lee gets popped on a botched drug test, and the UFC says, well, we don't need this guy, and we're going to show the world how tough we are on drugs. He's banned for a year. Blah blah blah. Well,
right, but I mean, it's a terrible example ethically, saying, okay, obviously, I'm hoping that you two guys don't support men beating up women, especially in elevators while on film. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like stupid on so many levels. But
do I really need to say that? I'm not for beating the crap out of women.
Right, good. So now that it's clear and been said, but the NFL Players Association, their only job is to do what? Is to protect the employees that are the players in the NFL. And we see that in MMA that's not the case. There is no organization for the protection of the MMA fighter.
Exactly. It's like a union. Whereas if the boss dislikes somebody that's in the union, he can't just fire him for no reason. He actually has to have a reason, and then they have to go through the trials and tribulations to make that happen. Whereas with the UFC, you look at someone like Gerald Harris. He has one bad fight. Right before that, he's getting knocked out of the night, really explosive, exciting fighter, has one bad fight, cut from the UFC. Or a John Fitch. Fight of the night performance, his next fight with Damian Maia, who is tough as hell and goes the distance with him, still has a great fight, cut from the UFC. There's no one that he could even go to and plead his case.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, what if the UFC just doesn't want him to fight there anymore? They're not keeping him from fighting anywhere else. We don't want you to fight in the UFC anymore. We don't like the way you fight. That's isn't that the employer? Isn't that the employer's discretion?
To some extent, but then you're talking about, well, these athletes have no rights whatsoever then. You can come and go, and we're using you in. And when you formed a monopoly like that, when you've bought up and closed down all the competition.
Oh no, here we go.
I'm for the worker, Tim Carpenter. I don't know about you. I don't come from your castle up in the sky.
No, I'm just playing devil's advocate because it's like.
I agree with you, but I'm going to be an asshole.
Yeah. No, but I mean, to a certain degree, Nate, you bring up a good point where it's like, the UFC can fire you at any point, but it's not like at any point you can go get a fighting job somewhere else.
Didn't John Fitch went and got a fighting job in World Series of Fighting?
Yeah, but he couldn't do that same thing while he was under contract. But while he's under contract, the UFC can get rid of him at any point.
I see your point.
Yeah, and that's something I've talked to other fighters, and they're like, oh, I just signed an 8-fight contract with the UFC. All that means is that if you do awesome, you can't get a raise, and they can fire you at any time. So John Fitch, it's just like Kung Lee right now, again, using him as an example, he has no desire to fight for the UFC. They trashed his reputation. They didn't stand behind him. They buried him without a trial, but the UFC won't cut him. So now he's stuck in a fight contract with 2 more fights where he just says, I don't want to fight for those guys. They don't appreciate me. It didn't stand by me in any way, shape, or form. And even now they're trashing his reputation. Listening to Joe Rogan and Brian Stan, both are basically saying, oh, yeah, he was pretty much guilty. We can see it, blah, blah, blah. And that's their representatives of the company, trashing their own employees.
Hey, Tim, what's going on over at your place right now that it's so freaking loud?
You want me to tell these guys to quiet down?
Yeah, because it keeps screwing up the audio.
All right, hold on a second. Dennis.
Nice. You see the way he's pointing at these guys like they're dogs. He's like, you over there, you this way. Keep your mouth shut. All right. So we didn't get off subject because we kind of stayed on the same idea. But what do you think, Nate Quarry, and then we'll send it over to you, Tim, that the UFC should have done to stay consistent when Jon Jones, and they were notified of Jon Jones' positive drug test? Nate Quarry.
Well, if you want to stay consistent with what you've done in the past, they would have had to take him off the card and suspend him for at least 6 months, 9 months to a year. I don't agree with necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go about it because, again, it is a business. They need to make money. So they could have continued on with the fight and then afterwards just honestly come out and said, we knew that he was on drugs. We talked with the athletic commission. They set the standard, said the fight that could go on. We take this very seriously. We know that our champions Should be a shining light, someone for kids to look up to. Because of that, we're going to suspend him now for 9 months. And that would have set really a precedence. They could have said, look, we still need to make money. That's what we do. But we are going to suspend him to let everyone know from the top down that there's no double standard in this organization.
What are your thoughts, Tim?
Do I have to? Okay. Yeah, I don't. The guy's the champion. You can't compare, and you can't treat Jon Jones like Matt Riddle. Matt Riddle is kind of, I mean, he's kind of a nobody in MMA, whereas Jon Jones is the probably the greatest fighter that ever lived. So he could
get the best man on the planet right now.
And there's millions of dollars involved in it. So, and this, I mean, this is business. This isn't like I know it's martial arts business, but it's not the whole honor and respect thing doesn't really carry over into cage fighting.
Well, then let's not compare him to Matt Riddle. Then let's compare him to Nick Diaz, who was suspended for having marijuana metabolite.
Nick Diaz is probably my favorite fighter in the world to watch, but he's not anywhere near he's never done what Jon Jones has done. Jon Jones is, like I said, is probably the best fighter that ever lived, where Nick Diaz is just one of the most entertaining fighters that ever lived.
So then you're saying that as long as you're good, you can get away with whatever you want.
I mean, that's the harsh reality of life, Nate. I mean, it's not.
Here's the thing, Quarry. Neither of you guys have been good enough to ever be the recipients of that kind of treatment. So look at these other guys.
Know how many hookers I've got buried in the backyard?
But I think the UFC, I kind of think they kind of handled it the way I would have handled it. If my number one racehorse, got in trouble like that, I would want to keep him out of the limelight. They did the right thing. They sent him to rehab. So
for a day. He was there for 24 hours.
Hey, look, I'm talking like a businessman right now.
Yeah, okay? Hey, sorry.
So,
as a friend of ours would say, white man magic.
Right. You send him to rehab for a day, whatever. All you got to do is say he's going to rehab, and then people will kind of leave him alone.
That's the headline. That's the headline, right?
Right. So whether he's there for a day, 30 days, who cares? He went there. You know what I mean? He gets his face. He doesn't do any interviews, and now he's going to come out in a couple weeks, and he'll be pretty much everybody's going to forget about this. You know what I mean?
Okay. I mean,
the normal fans, the people guys like us will talk about it, but the normal idiot fans that watch MMA they'll just be watching guys punch each other in the face.
Well, right, and I think Nate made a good point earlier about kind of the hardcore fan is the 5%, and then the other 95% are just like people that would watch football, that just are watching it for the entertainment aspect of it, or for 2.5 to 3 hours, and another UFC's coming up, and they'll order that, and they don't they don't look at, hey, what's going on with these fighters, or what may not be going on. It's a difficult. It's an interesting question because I see both sides of it. Look, does Jon Jones really have a drug problem? Who knows? You know what I'm saying? Like, if he does, then being in rehab might be the best thing, but he has to want to be there.
I think the drug problem is his business. Like, all this stuff is like, I mean.
Right, but when they drug test, right?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. They shouldn't be drug testing these guys.
Okay, well, that's a different story altogether.
Leave these guys alone.
These poor drug addicts.
They should make drugs mandatory. And then, like, if you're going to compete in UFC, you should have to use steroids and whatever else you can get your hands on to be as impressive as possible.
So you say be like Hector Lombard?
Yes.
All right. So
I just want to hear the song. Dana tries this. How's it go?
If you're gonna make a joke, you can know it ahead of time.
No. What?
Nothing. Even the crickets went silent on that one. But I see both sides of it. I think.
Aren't you perceptive?
Yeah, right. Well, but it's different. Like from a personal standpoint, I was okay. Like finding out about it, I'm like, man, they did what they had to do for the right thing, and for the best of the UFC. Do I look at Dana White progressively each time where something like this comes up in a different light? 100%. I think eventually what's probably going to happen is that, like his quote-unquote antics or the way that he's running the company is going to come back to bite him in the ass. And, it's starting to with, like the different lawsuits that are occurring and all this other stuff. But, an interesting subject nonetheless. Now, moving on, let's stay with the drugs, and Tim talked about it a minute ago. Quarry, and I think you've made public statements about this in the past. Where are you on the PEDs, on the steroids and the growth hormone and all this other stuff?
I think it's always going to be impossible to really lock down the athletes. I mean, Lance Armstrong is the perfect example of it. Supposedly he was drug tested every single day his entire career, and then afterwards comes out that he was the dirtiest cyclist of all time.
And only after he admitted it did he get caught.
Yeah, and when you have so much money involved for people, and people are going to look to take every advantage they can, and they look at athletes like they're this shining light, these guys that are so far above these carnal desires or the desire to succeed, or people say, oh, it's just about money for you. Money's about everything for people. And when it comes to athletes, the people that are condemning the athletes on steroids are the people that cheat on their wives, cheat on their taxes, speed to work, all these types of things. It's in human nature to try and break these types of laws. I think if it was me, if I was in charge of the UFC, I would get out of the drug testing business and say, we do whatever the Nevada State Athletic Commission tells us to do.
As an aside, would that be something you'd ever want to do if the Fertitta brothers came to you? Just in a parallel universe. We know this is never happening. But in a parallel universe, if the Fertitta brothers came to you and said, hey, we want you to replace Dana White, would you?
I think I would, because I have my own ideas on how to do it. As of right now, they have close to 600 fighters on contract. I would sit down. I would hold back one of the MMA summits, bring all the fighters in, and let everybody there know, I'm loyal to you. I want you to come in. I want you to fight hard. I want to build you up, and we're going to do profit sharing. The money that comes in from the pay-per-view, you're going to see how much that is. We're going to give X% of that profit to everybody that fights on the card.
Jesus Christ, you could tell that he's been waiting for somebody to ask him this question forever.
I'm not somebody that needs $100 million a year to live on. And when you have somebody who's tipping their waiter $10,000 for bringing them drinks, that means that money no longer means anything to them. If you look at somebody like a Tiger Woods, they did a study on what the amount of money Tiger Woods has and how much he spends compared to your average person. Your average person going to McDonald's and buying a burger for $1 is the same as Tiger Woods, at least in his heyday, going out and buying an Escalade. You have somebody that has that much money, it doesn't mean anything to them anymore, and you can see that with Dana's actions. But at the same time, they view the workers as the enemy. Don't you see how lucky you are to be here and fighting and doing this and doing that? We've given you all these opportunities. It's like, well, not only are we the workers, we're the product. We're what's being sold. Wouldn't you want your legacy to be helping those guys a little bit more when you already have plenty?
You're at this summit. You're now the king of the UFC, right, in this this parallel universe. And the question of performance-enhancing drugs come up at your fighters who have a voice now, and they say, hey, Nate, we think we should be allowed to take them. What would you say?
I would say we're following the Nevada State Athletic Commission rules everywhere that we have fights. And even in Europe, Australia, or somewhere where there wasn't an athletic commission, I would still do random day of the fight drug tests, those types of things. And the big reason for that is because the danger when you have guys that are supplementing and are becoming superhuman, they're hitting so much harder. They could be literally feeling no pain, have cardio for days, and be able to punch through a brick wall. That's going to do some major damage to these other athletes, and I think that's where you want to rein it in as much as reasonably possible. That being said, as a promoter, I would say that's not my specialty. That's what the athletic commission is for. They're the ones that we're going to follow the lead on. We're not going to try and take over the world with this. They already have that covered.
Let me ask you just like a quick percentage. If you had to take a guess of how many fighters in the UFC are on some sort of performance-enhancing drug, what would the percentage be?
I really have no idea, no guess whatsoever. And I was at one of the MMA summits one time, and you could see they were talking about some performance-enhancing drug, and there was a young fighter at the front of the room, and he was with a couple other fighters who had, I can never remember the proper term for it, glastonomia or bitch tits. So
Tim Carpenter, what's it called?
Gynecomastia.
Tim has suffered from bitch stomach, never bitch tits.
And you could see that one of the guys was just completely innocent and says, "I don't know what this is." And then the guys you were with were kind of looking at each other like, "Yeah, we don't know either." Your next sponsor should be some acne company because you've got so much backne. It's ridiculous.
Right. All right, Tim Carpenter. This in a separate alternate universe, and probably more likely, the Fertitta brothers come to you and say, "We would like for you to run the UFC." What's your stance on performance-enhancing drugs, and what kind of things would you do differently than Dana White's done, or would you do it the same way?
I probably wouldn't do it the same way. I would try to get, like I said, if, like Quarry said, there's always going to be people using these things. And if somebody's using it, that makes it like inherently more dangerous for the guy that's not using it, because the other guy is like you said, a superhuman. He can hit harder, he can go longer. So I would just make performance-enhancing drugs completely legal. And like I said, make them mandatory. If you want to fight in the UFC, you have to be superhuman. You can't come in here like some average Joe off the street that just likes to work out hard. If you're going to be fighting against a guy that's got the super soldier serum, you should have it too. Make it a level playing field, and then it would be more entertaining for the fans. I think everybody wins. Mandatory PEDs, because you'll never stop it. I think, and if you want to know a percentage, I would say it's probably like.
All right, so let me ask you from that
percentage.
Right, but hold on, but
69%.
No. In your vast experience in that behemoth of a fight organization, Bellator, what's the percentage of Bellator fighters on PEDs?
I'm not a scientist or anything, but I would say.
No, you would need to be a mathematician.
That's a form of math is a science, bro. Come on.
Math is a science, bro.
85%.
So 85% of the fighters in Bellator are on performance-enhancing drugs, and in the UFC,
85%. I would say like in all of athletics, there's a very large percentage of people, especially at the top, that are using performance-enhancing drugs, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it either.
Okay. All right, so you're alternate. I'm not even going to get into it because I'm not qualified enough to run the UFC, nor would I want to.
How do you feel about performance-enhancing drugs?
You know, I was once asked by a doctor if I'd use steroids because I had a problem with my eye. Yeah, exactly. And my response back was, if I took my shirt off, you wouldn't ask me this question. So I've never taken them. I don't know anything about them other than, when you look at a guy, he looks like a juice head and all this other stuff. From a standpoint of, I agree with Carpenter man, a lot of times you're leveling the playing field by using them, right? And I think I don't know how accurate this is, but in the Olympics, how many people are on performance-enhancing drugs? And you think about the Olympics happen every 4 years, and the difference between an Olympic gold medal and 8th place isn't probably very much in most sports, and a lot of that has to do with some of the drugs and all that other stuff. So, man, when you're at that point, we know that these guys in the Olympics and the UFC and the NFL are amazing athletes, and they only become better athletes with the ability to recover more, and be more explosive using the drugs. And from a fan standpoint, man, I don't care what they do to their body. Like, man, if it's ravaging their body, that's their problem. We don't particularly know the long-term studies, or at least I don't, of what the effects of abuse of the PEDs are. So the next thing you know, they'll be wearing like steel suits, and if that's gonna make it more interesting. But I mean, I'm not particularly against it. I wouldn't want my kids using them to get an edge up in athletics, unless they were possibly at the highest level of like a world-class athlete. Then it was like, hey, I need to do this, and that's a conversation I might have. But you hear horror stories of parents getting their kids steroids when they're in high school, or college kids getting the trailer park steroids and having some problems. So I think that's where the slippery slope comes, where they're looking at these athletes as an example. So moving on, of athletes and drugs and performance enhancing and not. We have a couple fights coming up that are interesting, but I think the one that's probably most interesting to me is Anderson Silva versus Nate Diaz. Anderson coming off that horrific leg injury, being
Nick
trained.
Diaz.
Whoever, Nate. It's a Diaz brother. Nick or Nate? Who's he fighting? Tim?
Nick.
Nate.
Nick.
Pam. So he's fighting a Diaz brother, right? And like Tim said, it's Tim's favorite or most entertaining fighter. That Diaz brother, there's always something about his fights that are great. If he's talking shit to you, or if he's punching you in the face, or after his after-fight antics where he's throwing a shoe at you in the emergency room, or whatever. Like, the guy always comes to fight. And to me, the interesting aspect of this fight is as much the two men, the combatants, Anderson Silva, who at one point was the best fighter pound for pound in the world, as it is Anderson Silva coming back from that horrific injury at what we would consider an advanced age for a fighter. Can he come back with the layoff and all this other stuff? So Quarry, how do you see this fight playing out?
I really like this fight, and I'm a big fan of both guys. Anderson Silva is just the nicest guy. He has the confidence of a champion, but is still just really nice. Nick Diaz, he gets a lot of gruff from fans, especially saying, "Oh, I can't stand that guy and his antics." What I can say about Nick and Nate Diaz, if you're a part of their clan, their group, their team, you're in. You're family. It's just that most people aren't that way. When I had him on my show a couple of years ago, after going out to the bar for half an hour, he was just the most open and friendly guy. So I'm rooting for both these guys. Nick, I know probably a little bit better than Anderson, but it's going to be a tough fight for Nick because of his style. I think the way that he walks, he puts a lot of weight on his lead leg and leaves him really open to getting kicked in that lead leg. And guys are starting to figure that out, and it's really disrupting them. And I think Anderson's going to be so quick and moving around, and I think he's going to want to prove to the world that his kicks are back where they should be. He's going to be throwing a lot of kicks. It's going to be a tough fight for Nick. He really needs to set the pace, move forward quite a bit.
All right, what's your prediction?
I hate doing predictions because I usually get them wrong and I always piss somebody off. I'd say probably Anderson by decision because Nick's a really tough guy to finish. What are you freaking out about? You're freaking me out. But yeah, I'd be rooting for Nick, I think, just because I really dig his story and where he came from and all that. But it's going to be a tough fight for him.
So I'm not sure if I quite got your prediction.
Let's not forget, he said Anderson Silva by decision.
But then he said, but I'm rooting for Nick Diaz. He kind of waffled. But go ahead. I wasn't paying attention.
I didn't waffle. I said I would like
Nick Diaz.
So I think Anderson's going to win.
All right.
Now Nick is going to hate me, and I dislike that. That's great. That's awesome.
That's fine. I mean, whatever. All right, Tim Carpenter, your keys to the fight and prediction.
Pain.
Nick Diaz is going to win.
How?
TKO.
Okay. By what? Leg breakage? What?
No, I think he's gonna. It's gonna be like, I think Nick Diaz is gonna take a serious amount of punishment, like the first 2 rounds, and then he's gonna wear him down just with pressure, the same way he does with everybody.
Now, is this a 3 or a 5 round fight?
5.
5. Okay, so that could work well for him, being that Anderson's coming off the layoff. But Anderson's never shown that he's got bad cardio.
No, he hasn't. But he's never been. I mean, a lot of people that Nick Diaz beats down don't look like they have bad cardio until they get beat down. I can see, like, it's a weird matchup because Anderson Silva is like a pinpoint striker and Nick Diaz is like a volume striker. So, but he's also very pinpoint with his punches. They're just not like Anderson Silva is like a 1 shot, 1 kill. Nick Diaz is like 50 shots and then 1 shot, 1 kill.
Gotcha.
But I think Nick Diaz is going to win.
So, would you be making this prediction of Nick Diaz winning a year and a half ago? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if Anderson hadn't lost to Weidman twice with this terrible injury, or do you just think that this matchup is not a good matchup for him, regardless of when it would be?
I don't think it's the injury to his leg that's going to really have much to do with it. I think it's if you've seen Anderson Silva in his last few fights, like punches have been dropping him that like he used to be able to just stick his face out and let Rich Franklin punch him in his face, like square on his chin, and nothing would happen. And then when he fought Chael Sonnen, one of Chael Sonnen's fucking punches dropped him. And then Chris Weidman lays him out cold with a glancing shot. I think his. But
I mean, like, how powerful can Rich Franklin's punches be?
Let me tell you, I've been punched by both those guys, by Chael and Rich. Big difference.
Exactly. So I think Silva, it's not just like his leg injury that's a big deal. I think he's I'm not going to say he's done as a fighter, but he's deteriorating as a fighter.
We see that happen, right, Nate? Where, you know, a little bit more in boxing, somewhat in MMA, that once, you know, a fighter with a good chin has a great chin, then it gets kind of exposed, and then it seems to get exposed more and more. Like, the best example I give in MMA is like Chuck Liddell. For years, it was like he doesn't get knocked out, and then he loses a series of fights by knockout.
Yeah, with Chuck, he lost 5 of his last 6 fights getting knocked out every time. And that's what really kills a lot of guys in practice and training. They train so hard, they practice so hard, and every sparring session is to the death, it seems, and they're getting these minor concussions. They may not even notice it, but they're getting them years and years along the journey, and it just wears them out. I always recommend it, though, if you have to get a concussion, get one.
If you have to, okay.
But then after that, do everything you can to avoid it. Tell your training partners to slow down, wear bigger sparring gloves, put on headgear, all these types of things, because this is your equipment. And you can make your body tougher, you can make it stronger, you can make it faster. You can't make your brain more durable. The more damage it takes, the worse it gets, and that's why you see guys losing their chin, and it just happens over time.
What do you think, Tim, of that whole idea of kind of losing your chin? Is that real, or we just make that up?
No, it's definitely real. It's like a bank account, and you keep taking money out, and eventually it's empty.
But with a bank account, you could put money in. We're saying you can't put money into the chin?
No, right. You can't put money into the chin.
All right, so going back, Nate Quarry, your prediction is Anderson Silva by, what was it, TKO, and I don't know, whatever you said. Tim Carpenter, you said 5-round decision for...
No, I said
listening?
I said, yeah.
Obviously not.
You need to be a little bit more present here, dude. You got I said Nick Diaz by, I think, 4th round TKO.
All right. Quarry, what did you say? You said Anderson
5-round
Silva.
decision.
5-round decision. Thank you, Tim. Thanks for listening.
All right. Well, all right. I'm sorry, guys. I'm like you said, I got to be more present. I will go out on a limb and pick whatever the Diaz brother is. I will pick him another 5-round grinded out decision. I just think that Anderson, for as amazing as he is, it's a big hill to climb off of that crazy injury, time off. I mean, he's an amazing fighter, but not that Diaz's time is now, but I think Diaz is just kind of, I think Diaz really needs this fight to stay relevant.
If Diaz might be off, have had more time off than Silva has, not because of injury, just he retired and then he came back.
Yeah, but he retires like every other month.
Right, and he's a guy that even if he's not fighting, he's training.
Right, doing triathlons and all this other stuff. So I have Diaz winning a decision. So next week we'll be able to kind of see who was right and who was wrong.
No, wait, isn't that fight's the 31st?
Nah, whatever. Like in a couple weeks. Anyway, so a couple more things, guys, and then we're going to wrap it up. Donald Cerrone is fighting who? Ben Henderson, right? Is that the 3rd time, or is he? Who's Donald Cerrone? I'm fucking so lost anymore.
He's fighting Ben Henderson.
And the headline is that the UFC hasn't talked to Ben Henderson yet about his fight with Donald Cerrone. Now, I hadn't been able to read the article, but that's a pretty damning statement to make. It's just like, yeah, we're going to switch the fight. We're not going to talk to you. But regardless of that fight's coming up a lot sooner than Anderson Silva and Nate Diaz. But this is the 3rd time these guys have fought. Do you think that this fight is going to be any different than the last 2 times that they fought, or with a different outcome? Nate Quarry.
Well, I'm going to let Tim address this one first so I can formulate an opinion against it.
I think, has Henderson beat him twice already?
Yeah, he's beat him once decision, one First time decision, second time submission.
I think Cowboy is going to beat him this time. I think Henderson. I mean, Henderson's like 0-2 in his last two.
Yeah, whatever.
He got armbarred and then he got knocked out.
Yeah, I think that might have been an early stoppage in that second one. I didn't see the fight, but
well, if you didn't see the fight, why do you think it was an early stoppage?
So just from what
I saw, he got fucking knocked out. He got kneed in the face and he got punched several times on the ground. I mean, it was early. If you wanted to see Ben Henderson die, it was extremely premature. If you don't like Ben Henderson, you want to see him get put in the hospital, it was very premature.
Well,
but
maybe that's where I'm coming from.
As professional fighting goes, it was a great stoppage.
All right, so Ben Henderson's 0-2 in his last two fights. Donald Cerrone is 2-0 in his last two fights.
Donald Cerrone's like fucking 7-0 in his last 7 fights.
How's he 7-0 in his last 2 fights?
I said so.
I know. But guys, so what are the keys to victory in this fight?
For Cerrone?
Well, you're picking Cerrone. How would you say the keys to victory for Henderson are? But go ahead.
Cerrone's just gonna do. He's like dangerous everywhere. He's gonna. I think he's bigger. He's stronger now. I think he's just he's better now than he was when they fought years ago. And I don't think Henderson has really added that much to his game. Whereas Henderson hasn't added that much to his game. He's kind of the same fighter he was 3-4 years ago. Whereas Cerrone is like, he's on fire right now. You got a guy that's 7-0 in his last 7, maybe. I don't know the exact number. And then you got a guy that's dropped his last 2 by being finished very quickly. And
right, but
he's another guy that's had a lot of very grueling fights. He's had like a bunch of 5-round wars with like
good guys, Frankie Edgar,
like all these guys have like, he's been in some serious battles. But so is Cerrone. But I think Cerrone's going to TKO. That's what I think.
Nate Quarry, now that you've formulated a opinion.
Yeah, I'm probably going to agree with Tim on this one. I think the big thing here is we get to a point where in MMA all the skills are going to be fairly similar, and a lot of it's going to be mindset. With Henderson coming off a couple losses, I think that's going to weigh on him. And then with Cowboy coming off of his last dominant win where his opponent wouldn't really even engage with him, I think he's going to be using that momentum and really believe in himself and bring the fight to Henderson.
All right, so oddly, I will disagree with you too because I'm a huge Henderson fan. I like really, not that he's an exciting fighter, but I like the kind of volume and output and kind of work that he puts in. But I think the mindset that you're referring to, Quarry, might be, it's kind of like Henderson's mindset against Anthony Pettis. He's like, I can't figure out a way to beat this guy, and he always loses to him. The 2 times they fought, there's 2 losses. And I think this is just going to be a third loss for Cerrone. For as good as Cerrone is, and I have a lot of respect for his skills, I think that not being able to beat Ben Henderson twice, I don't really see, like he may have improved, but he hasn't improved that much. And I don't, for as many wars as Henderson's been in, these last 2 fights are not a great reflection of his skill, capacity, or what he can do. And he was training for this fight with a full camp for a dangerous Eddie Alvarez who he's never fought before. So I think he'll come in prepared, and he'll win this fight like he wins most of his fights by kind of a grinded out. I seem to always call grinded out decision, but grinded out decision, Ben Henderson.
Wrong.
All right, I could be. All right, guys. Anything you'd like? Any parting shots from you, Mr. Nate Quarry?
Go to Zombie Cage Fighter and support my brand. That's it.
Is that website finally working again?
No, but it could be. Just be aware of it. Just know so that when it is, you can be ready.
Yeah, just go every day until it's up and running. All right.
Yeah.
Tim Carpenter. Anything?
Go to Zombie Cage Fighter and support Nate Quarry's brand.
All right. So the thing for today is go to Zombie Cage Fighter and support Nate's brand. All right, everybody. This is In Between Rounds with Nate Quarry, Tim Carpenter, and Professor Marco Perazzo. Thanks for listening, and make sure you hit the subscribe button to let you know when new content comes out.
I should do that.